Today I'm speaking to Sian Edwards. Sian is head of conducting at the Royal Academy of Music, and she has a successful career both with symphony and opera companies all over the world. Hello, Sian.
Hi, great to see you.
Now, can you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and how you got to where you are today?
Yes, so I work in classical music generally, although I also am interested in anything contemporary, whether it's really difficult squeaky gate music or pop or jazz. So I'm somebody who just enjoys music and loves music very much. And that's something that started when I was a really small child. And, you know, my parents were not in any way musical, other than they also liked music and had a record player, and they had a piano in the house. And when I was about 6, I said to my mum, I just got to learn the piano. And she was a bit anxious because I think most children can easily be put off by the archetypal fierce piano teacher. And I certainly had one of those, but somehow I stuck at it, and piano and music generally became very important to me as a kid at school. I think I wasn't too great at the academic side, so having something else that was something I could do began to mean a lot. And I was at school in rural Sussex, and the class probably had a couple of broken tambourines and a triangle, I seem to remember. We sang horrible sort of community songs in our music class, so that wasn't great either. But I went to secondary school. My dad got a job in the South Midlands, and I went to secondary school in Oxford, and everything changed. And this was also a period in the very late 60s, early 70s, when the government were actually funding children to learn an instrument. So every kid came out of school carrying something or other, and everyone was learning to play music. And I just loved that. And I started to play the French horn as well as doing piano. I'm not quite sure why I took up the horn, quite honestly, but it was at first, you know, everyone said, oh, it's very difficult, you know, and sure enough, first 2 years, I could barely get a note out of the thing. But then I got into the Oxfordshire County Youth Orchestra, junior orchestra, and there I was on a Saturday morning, no idea what I was doing, but this magic of being in a large ensemble of other young people playing music was just addictive. I loved it. And the horn playing suddenly switched on, and I realized what I was trying to do. And I quite quickly then got into the bigger orchestra, and we were playing serious symphonic repertoire, you know, big Sibelius symphonies and things like this. And I guess, you know, that really switched everything on. And I then went to music college to study music. When I was at Oxford, as a schoolgirl, I was quite good on the horn after that, and used to play around Oxford University as well. And so I felt that rather than go to university, I really wanted to go to music college and learn how to really do this thing. I went to the Royal Northern in the end in Manchester, because my horn teacher suddenly announced he wasn't going to teach at the Royal Academy anymore. And here am I, a real southern girl, you know, never been further north than Birmingham. And there I was in Manchester for quite a long time, actually. And yeah, so that it was, you know, music is a tough thing because it can be so competitive, but at the same time, it was a very important part of my life from very early on.
Lovely to hear. What sort of music do you love to be involved in?
The music I love to be involved in is sort of swivels between conducting operas, which are big and very complicated affairs, where you have rehearsals over 4 or 5 weeks with a pianist and singers, and you work on the music with the singers, and then you spend weeks with a director slowly putting together how the scenes are all going to come together on the stage. And then I will go away at some point and rehearse the orchestra separately. And then eventually you put the orchestra in the pit with the singers on the stage, and you eventually have a performance. And that's a fantastic way of working with a big group of people in a big collaboration. But sometimes it feels very unwieldy. And so I sometimes, when I'm doing that kind of work, long for the kind of orchestral work where you often have only one rehearsal in a concert, actually, if you're in Britain. You know, we're famous for being able to sight read everything incredibly quickly and put together things very fast, which is a bit frantic, frankly. But, you know, also orchestras where you have 2 or 3 days of rehearsal or an ensemble and you can build up a program together. And the big difference being that when you're on stage and the players can really see me, often we can do things in quite a sort of free way in the concert. You know, we can suddenly have a good idea and a new idea will take the tempo in a slightly different way or whatever. Whereas when you're building up an opera, it's much more block by block. And once you get to the performances, basically what you've rehearsed is what you will have in the performances. And it feels like a slightly bigger ship to sail somehow.
And the current pandemic has naturally created some serious problems for recording and creating music. It's encouraging to see orchestras and ensembles rising to the challenge. Is it possible to conduct an orchestra remotely?
I have to say, well, the big problem we've got is the delay, of course, on Zoom or anything else. And, you know, while we're incredibly grateful to have all this technology at our fingertips now, and even I can get it at my fingertips a bit, you know, the difficulty of having everything slightly delayed and also delayed in slightly different ways means that it is hard. And a colleague of mine tried to do this at the Royal College of Music, actually. He was in Amsterdam and they had him conducting on a huge screen in front of the orchestra. But although the orchestra could see him and they could react to what he was doing, he was then receiving the sound later than he was actually putting his baton to the point at which he thought the music was coming. And so in the end, I have to say that one of the young conductors got a good gig out of that and managed to take over and do it for this guy. So everyone was happy in the end, but it, you know, it was worth trying. But I think there still needs to be a lot of work done actually on this delay problem.
Yeah. Now, this interview is being released on International Women's Day 2021. And the theme this year is Choose to Challenge. And in the conducting world, there does seem to be a bit of a predominance of male conductors in the concert hall and on recordings. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you brought up the subject, actually, Robert, because I know some people don't, you know, some women, for example, working in this field don't really like to talk about it. They feel, I think, that they just want to be musicians and, you know, whether they're male or female shouldn't come into it. But you're right that it's so obvious that there are very, very few women on the podium in at least the professional levels. I think it has to be said that there are fantastic women and men working at the next level down, if you like, if you can call it levels in any kind of, I don't like to talk about it like that really. But, you know, the people who are working with good amateur orchestras, fantastic youth orchestras, coaching ensembles, working with choirs, particularly, loads of women doing all that sort of work. So why aren't they coming through to actually working on the professional podium? And I think that is something that is at last being addressed. A friend of mine about 5 or 6 years ago, reacting to something that's stupid that a conductor had said about, you know, he didn't think women could be conductors. And she said, there's no good complaining about it. We've got to do something. And here she is challenging something. And so she set up courses for women who were interested in conducting. And at first it was very, very small steps in that I think the women who came forward who were interested really had to persuade themselves that they were allowed to do this, which is very interesting, isn't it? You know, women are so successful in so many different areas, and that the idea of giving yourself permission to actually stand in that leadership role, if you like, to have ideas that you want to share with others about the way music might go, seemed very difficult for a lot of people. I think for myself, I was very lucky in that going back to my school days and, you know, mentioning that I could play the horn quite well, quite quickly once I was getting going on it. Quite often the conductor of the youth orchestra would say, oh, Sian, you know, can you just run through something with the winds while I fix something with the strings? And at that time, actually, strings were really struggling with all the millions of notes they have to play. And I would run through something that we were doing in the symphony with the winds. So it became a very natural thing for me to just say, yeah, I'll do that. You know, yes, I'd love to do that. I'll put on that concert. I'll play for my friends and then they'll come and play for something that I'm arranging and putting on. And the very fact in Britain that you've organized a concert means, you know, you probably are going to be the person on the podium. And there's a lovely sort of do-it-yourself side to how we approach it over here, which I think is much less formal than quite a lot of conservatoires, where you really have to think about, I'm going to be a conductor before you've even tried it. So here there are lots of opportunities for people to have a go, if you like, or make possibilities for themselves to do it. And that's certainly what I did. And I did all that without really thinking, oh, I'm going to be a conductor now. I was just doing music. And I think at that time, actually, 70s, 80s, you know, Karajan and Bernstein, these two iconic conducting figures, were huge personalities. And I think most people thought of a conductor as being an older man with preferably white hair and, you know, tremendously expressive face or whatever. And I, of course, didn't fit into that category in any way. But then Simon Rattle was conducting, and I think he was able to show that you could be young, enthusiastic, and actually, you know, quite individual in the way you dressed and the way you presented yourself. And you know, you could still have something to offer to orchestral musicians in this case. And I think that that's gradually filtered through all of music, actually. So the question now is, absolutely, where are the women? And through these early courses, and now I run one actually for people who are thinking of doing a master's in conducting, lots more women are coming forward, and they sometimes are not quite as good as the men. And certainly at master's level, I don't feel that I can discriminate, but we're doing lots to help them just before that, you know, make that step up that goes, yes, I can really do this. I really want it. And I'm going to absolutely go out and do that. So it's taken a while, but it is now coming.
Great, yeah, and the role of conductor, I suppose, is the ultimate leadership role, isn't it? You know, so how do you see, as we come out of the pandemic, how do you see leadership changing or developing or evolving?
I think questions of leadership are so interesting, and in a way, up till quite recently, I'd never really asked myself what that is, perhaps in a sort of broader picture. But I've always felt for myself that if you're in a role like being a conductor, your responsibility, if you like, is to know the music and understand the big picture of the score with, you know, 32 lines or whatever, more than, you know, everybody else in the orchestra, so that you're bringing something to the players that they don't have. Because of course they've got the parts with all the instructions written on them. You know, they don't need to be told how to play their instruments. So what is it we're doing? And I think what we're doing is trying to bring that bigger vision, if you like, of what the piece could be at this moment on this day in this hall with these people, and bringing a sort of sense of the heart and the drama and the narrative, perhaps, of the story of the music to the podium, and sharing that with the players, and hopefully ending up, you know, with a unified performance. So that's our role. But what's interesting is that in an orchestra, for example, and probably this is the same in the way many companies are also structured, you've got smaller groups who are also highly hierarchical. So, you know, if you take the oboe section, for example, you've got your first oboe, and they are very much the lead person in that group. You've got your second oboe, whose job is to really fit the first oboe like a glove when they're playing. And you may have a third oboe who may also play the cor anglais, or in the flutes, your third flute might also play the piccolo. But interestingly, again, the leaders of those sections are very important, and those leaders will work with each other. And the leaders of the brass groups, the trumpets, the trombones, the horns, will also work with each other. The string groups also, much bigger group in the orchestra, they've all got their own leaders. And then principal leader is the concertmaster, who's also got a big responsibility to be the main bridge between the conductor and the orchestra, and who's the only one really who can sort of lean up to you and go, I think we ought to have the break now, or, you know, I really think we're rushing in that third beat or something, and you know, I think you could do something about that. You know, most people won't offer any suggestions when you're actually in the live rehearsal, even if they might be very frustrated about something. So you're working with a group that itself is a very highly regulated machine. And I guess that's the same for many companies, you know, that each department has its own leaders and bosses, and, you know, everything kind of works like that. But what's very interesting for musicians is that it's only the conductor who can be fired, actually. You know, in most orchestras, even freelance orchestras, very difficult to not hire a certain player, you know. Certainly in all the BBC orchestras, for example, which are salaried, you can't fire anybody. So I could get very upset with a player who's been quite rude, but I'm the one that won't be invited back, you know, and they will be there. So there's an interesting power thing going on here, which means that the conductors really do have to, if you like, be convincing, make the orchestra feel both comfortable and secure in what they're doing, but also that they're taken on a journey together that they feel is valid and worthwhile, and that the performances are good, and that everyone feels that, you know, you're able to communicate the music via the orchestra back out to the audience in a way that's effective and people feel comfortable. So I think that that is an interesting way of keeping conductors quite humble actually now. And that's a big change from what it used to be. You know, the famous thing of conductors hiring and firing musicians and behaving in an incredibly autocratic way, it's all gone. And so even though the conductor comes on and in a way is the sort of figurehead of the orchestra, you know, we're the last to come onto the stage, and, you know, we're sort of getting the orchestra up and everybody bows, and it's all very formal and very ritualistic in many ways. But the conductor is a sort of representative, if you like, of the orchestra to the public. But yeah, at the same time, it's really a big collaboration that's going on there all the time.
Yeah, as you're talking, it's almost sort of drawing parallels with government as well. It's quite interesting. It's quite interesting metaphor, really, I think.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I think generally that the way we see leadership in this country really needs to be considered and developed, because I notice that my American colleagues, for example, have no problem at all with leadership, management, how one person is one position and another person is another, because I think they're trained. You know, they realize that if you're going to have a role with responsibility for other people's work or whatever, you need training. And you need sort of all those tools that to do with, you know, how you manage people, how you relate to others, how you communicate, all the things that are very subtle but very important. And I think in Britain, we still tend to get hung up on class issues, you know, and who does she think she is and why are they doing it and not me? And, or, you know, just we don't like what they're doing, but we're not going to tell them, we're just going to moan, you know, and all those sort of communication things that could be so much more open. And for the person who's leading as well, you know, to have the confidence to be open to people saying, that speech was great, but I don't think actually that third sentence was quite what would be helpful here. Or we think, you know, we need to discuss something. I think it would be so good. And of course, there are many people already who are like that, but I think we need to have more dialogue about what we think authority and leadership and management actually are, and how we can all do it better, actually.
As well as your work at the Royal Academy and your concert programme, I believe you're working on projects more locally in Sussex as well.
Yes, well, I've done some lovely things because I live in Lewes, which is very near Glyndebourne. And so one of the marvellous things is having contact with that incredibly exciting place. And I know opera has this, stigma about it, that it's very elite and it's only for people who know all about it already. And basically, you've got to have a lot of money to go there. Not completely true. It's certainly in the summer season true to some extent that the tickets are expensive, unless you're under 30. And then you can get special discounts. And all my nephews and nieces go off and have a fantastic time. But the autumn touring opera, which is just as good, actually, is much more reasonable. That's a bit of our diversion to say they also at Glyndebourne are very interested in their outreach work. And one of the big things they've developed over the last 30 years is world-leading programs and projects for local people. And I've done several of these actually with young people, say, from all around the Glyndebourne area. That's Lewes, Hailsham, Eastbourne, right down to Brighton, the other side, Uckfield, who come and work on a new opera, for example. I did a wonderful piece called Nothing, which is a great title, very moving and very strong and difficult, actually, you know, but the students all came together and did a wonderful thing as young singers. So they were all sort of 14 to 18-year-olds. And I've done another piece more recently at the Dome in Brighton that was with younger children, actually, and that was also incredibly nice. And that was interesting because it had a jazz band playing who did wonderful sort of improvisatory sections in between some very crystalline classical type singing written by Howard Skempton, a contemporary composer, who was there helping us find, what he was really imagining. And we did that with beautiful lighting, and yeah, that was really beautiful, actually. So I've been really happy to be involved in projects like that.
Sounds wonderful. Okay, and I hope that in time when the restrictions are lifted, that we'll hear much more. Do you have any expectations, any projects or anything coming up?
Well, I'm just actually on Women's Day going to be back at the Academy. At last, they've been able to open their doors, like a number of people. And of course, all the schools are going back next Monday. So I'm really pleased to be able to do that and meet my students face to face. We've been doing lots of Zoom time, but we've also just got fed up with that, and we can't wait to actually get back to live music. And they'll be doing a big project at the end of next week, actually, with players. So they're thrilled about that. But for my own freelance work, sadly, every time something seems to be almost hoving into sight, it gets cancelled at the moment or put back. So most of what I'm doing, I think, is not going to be till 2022 now. Certainly, my colleague Joanna McGregor, who runs the Brighton Philharmonic Orchestra now as artistic director, and she's a wonderful pianist and creative person in general, and is doing some concerts with Brighton Philharmonic players, online again, while we can't do anything live. She and I are going to collaborate probably next March, actually, a year from now, on a concert at the Dome. So I'm really looking forward to that. Lovely.
Sian, thank you very much for your conversation today.
Robert, thank you. And really lovely that you've got this series of programs going.
Thank you.